The warning arrived 3 hours before atmospheric entry, delivered in the clipped, humorless tone that only a professional survival analyst could manage, and it made every non-human on the bridge quietly consider their wills. The planet below them churned like a wounded beast, continents cracked by tectonic violence, storms crawling across the surface with electrical intensity high enough to fry unshielded sensors. Dr. Kthal of the Thurinclade, author of the infamous First Night Mortality Index, stood at the center of the holodable and flexed his mandibles in agitation as data streams poured in. 90% fatality within the first rotation, he said, tapping the display. No breathable equilibrium, hostile megafauna, microbial toxicity, gravitational instability, and unpredictable weather cycles. Standard protocol is orbital quarantine. Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Then Lieutenant Mark Reyes leaned back in his crash couch, sipped lukewarm coffee, and shrugged. Sounds like a normal Tuesday. The translator hesitated, recalibrated, and delivered the words again. Several aliens flinched. This mission was supposed to be routine, a survey drop, quick scans, samples out. Instead, a debris field from an ancient orbital war had shredded their engines, forcing an emergency descent. Escape pods were limited. Supplies were worse. The human contingent numbered exactly 1. Kthal turned his multifaceted gaze toward Reyes, incredulous. You are dismissing a projected extinction-level scenario. Reyes smiled, a small, tired expression that somehow radiated confidence. Doc, I grew up in a flood zone, did disaster relief in 3 systems, and my grandma used to say if the ground isn't trying to kill you, you're not paying attention. We'll adapt. The ship shuddered as another alarm wailed. Navigation failed. Gravity spiked, then dipped. Someone cursed in 3 languages. As the atmosphere swallowed them, fire wrapped the hull like a living thing. Kthal clutched a railing, calculating survival odds that dropped by the second. Reyes strapped in tighter and began calmly issuing suggestions. Angle the descent, vent this section, reroute power there. No one questioned him. They hit the surface hard, skidding through a jungle of crystalline trees that rang like bells when shattered. The ship came to rest half buried in violet mud, steam hissing from ruptured seams. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Reyes unbuckled, cracked his neck, and said, "Okay. First rule, don't touch anything glowing." Outside, something enormous roared, and the planet began its first attempt to prove the expert right. The roar repeated, closer this time, vibrating through the hull and into the bones of everyone aboard, and panic threatened to bloom until Reyes grabbed a toolkit and popped the nearest hatch. Toxicity alarms screamed as alien crew members scrambled to stop him, but he was already sealing a respirator over his face and stepping into the steaming jungle air. "Baseline exposure test," he said through the calm, voice steady. "If I drop, mark it as a no." Kthal watched in horror as the human planted his boots in mud that dissolved probes on contact. Reyes sank an inch, adjusted his stance, and moved on, collecting samples with improvised tools made from scrap. The megafauna revealed itself moments later, a quadruped the size of a shuttle, plated in translucent armor, eyes glowing with bioluminescent malice. It charged. Kthal braced for the human's death. Reyes instead threw a ration pack to the side and shouted, "Hey! Over here!" The creature veered, distracted by the unfamiliar scent, and plowed into a stand of crystal trees, impaling itself amid resonant chimes. It thrashed stuck. Reyes jogged back, breathing hard but grinning. "Behavioral predictability," he said. "Big things are usually dumb." Complications mounted fast. Acid rain began to fall, forcing the crew to rig shelters from hull plating. The ground shifted hourly, opening fissures without warning. Native microorganisms infiltrated systems, corroding circuits and causing hallucinations in non-human minds. Kthal's projections worsened. Reyes responded by organizing routines, watch rotations, hydration schedules, morale breaks. He taught the aliens how to tell safe ground from deadly by subtle cues, color gradients, insect absence, the smell of ozone. When power failed, he rewired consoles with stripped cable and a knife. When food ran low, he trapped small, six-legged creatures and roasted them over controlled plasma leaks, eating first to prove it was safe. "Tastes like chicken," he lied. Night fell hard and fast, bringing predators that hunted by vibration. Reyes ordered everyone to freeze, even as one crew member sobbed. He crawled outside alone, planted vibration dampeners made from spare boots and insulation, and led the creatures away by tapping rhythmically on metal, humming an old song. Hours later, soaked and bleeding from shallow cuts, he returned. "See?" he said lightly. "Tuesday." Cthal began to revise his models, adding a variable he never quantified before: human stubbornness. By the third day, they had mapped a safe perimeter, established a signal beacon from wreckage, and even laughed once, briefly, when Reyes slipped in the mud and bowed theatrically. Yet the planet was not finished. Sensors detected a storm system converging, energy levels beyond anything recorded. Survival would require more than adaptation. It would require defiance. The sky darkened to a bruised purple as the storm arrived, winds howling with enough force to peel armor from the ship's remains, and Cthal realized with cold clarity that this was the statistical spike that ended expeditions. Lightning crawled sideways, striking the ground in branching patterns that turned mud to glass. The beacon flickered. Reyes stared at the clouds, calculating. "We can't ride this out," he said. "We ground it." No one understood until he started dragging conductive debris into a rough circle around their shelter, hammering stakes deep into the unstable earth. He ordered the crew underground into a cavity revealed by a recent quake, sealing the entrance with layered shielding. Alone again, he climbed the wreckage, rain burning his skin through the suit. The first bolt hit the ring, energy screaming through metal and dissipating into the ground. The second overloaded the system, detonating a panel and throwing Reyes clear. Cthal screamed his name over the comm as readings spiked beyond survivable thresholds. Reyes coughed, staggered up, and rerouted the flow manually, using his own body as a bridge for a fraction of a second, grounding the surge. Pain racked him, but he laughed, wild and fierce. "Told you," he gasped. Tuesday. The storm raged for hours, each strike a potential extinction. Inside the shelter, aliens huddled, listening to the human fight their planet like it was an argument he refused to lose. When the final thunder rolled away, silence fell, broken only by the crackle of cooling glass. Reyes collapsed at the shelter entrance, smoking slightly. They dragged him inside, treating burns with dwindling supplies. He lived. Rescue signals finally pierced the atmosphere at dawn, drawn by the beacon that had somehow survived. As extraction ships descended, Cthal looked at the human resting against the crate, eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. The models had been wrong. Not because the data was flawed, but because it had never accounted for a species that treated lethal chaos as routine inconvenience. As they lifted off, the planet roared one last time, denied its victory. Weeks later, safe in a sterile station, Cthal presented his revised findings to a stunned council, mandibles trembling with something like awe. "The human variable," he concluded, "renders first-night mortality predictions unreliable." The report circulated quickly, annotated with footage of Reyes sipping coffee amid destruction. Humans were reassigned from high-risk liability to strategic survival asset. Reyes himself returned to duty after insisting the scars were barely noticeable. When asked about the incident, he shrugged. "You plan, you adapt, you keep moving," he said. "And you complain about the weather." The council laughed, uneasily. Somewhere, a new warning was drafted, and somewhere else, a human heard it and smiled. The first scream came from the sensors, not a throat, a sudden shrill spike that meant the planet had noticed them and decided to answer back. Acid rain began falling in irregular bursts, each droplet hissing as it struck the cracked hull, eating through alloys that had survived vacuum and warfare. Inside the wreck, the alien crew scattered in panic, limbs scrabbling for purchase as gravity fluctuated again, heavier now, pressing them into the deck like judgment. Dr. Cthal watched projections collapse into red failure spirals and knew this was the point where expeditions usually ended, when fear outpaced planning and statistics fulfilled themselves. Mark Reyes, however, was already moving, boots splashing through corrosive runoff as he dragged a storage locker into position to block a breach. "Okay," he said, voice calm over the comms. "New rule, if it smells sweet, don't breathe it." The translator lagged, then complied. Outside, the jungle reacted violently to the rain, crystalline foliage dissolving into razor-edged slurry while something large shifted beneath the mud, displacing earth in slow, deliberate waves. Kthal tried to issue orders, but his training fractured under the speed of cascading disasters. Reyes filled the silence with action, assigning tasks like he'd been born to this chaos. "You, forearms, start sealing gaps with anything not actively melting. You, eyes on the ground, call out tremors early. Doc, I need your worst-case forecast, not the polite version." Kthal hesitated, then obeyed. 70% chance of sinkhole collapse within the hour. 82% probability of indigenous microorganisms breaching your suits. Cognitive effects unknown. Reyes nodded. "So we're on a clock." He stripped insulation from a wall panel, wrapping it around exposed joints, then jammed a power conduit into the mud, testing resistance. The ground hissed but held. Good enough. When one crew member began hallucinating, babbling about voices in the rain, Reyes slapped a rebreather on them and injected a stimulant from his own kit, muttering, "Sorry about the headache." Night approached faster than expected, the sky dimming as if someone had turned down reality's lights. With it came the predators. They didn't roar this time. They clicked, a rhythmic sound that set teeth on edge and made the ground vibrate in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Kthal recognized pack hunting behavior and felt cold dread. Reyes listened, head tilted. "They're mapping us," he said. "Using echoes. Don't move." The clicking circled closer, shapes flickering just beyond the rain. One creature lunged, striking the hull with enough force to dent it inward. Another followed. Panic surged. Reyes grabbed a length of metal, struck it once against the ground, then again, establishing a counter-rhythm. The clicking faltered, confused. He expanded the pattern, moving slowly, deliberately, leading the sound away from the shelter. A claw grazed his arm, tearing fabric, blood mixing with rain. He didn't stop. Minutes stretched like hours until the clicking faded into the distance. Reyes staggered back, pale but upright. "Predators hate bad data," he said. The crew stared at him like he was a myth made flesh. Power failed completely soon after, plunging them into darkness broken only by bioluminescent spores drifting through the air. The spores settled on skin, armor, equipment, glowing brighter as heart rates increased. Kthal's species reacted badly, panic amplifying the light until they were beacons. Reyes cursed softly and ordered everyone to lie flat, slow their breathing. He scraped mud over himself, dimming the glow, then moved from crew member to crew member, smearing them with wet earth despite their protests. "Camouflage," he said. "Works on Earth. Works here." The ground shook again, a deep, rolling motion that opened a fissure meters from their shelter. Heat poured out, along with a low, hungry hum. "That's not good," Reyes muttered. Kthal's scanners screamed about geothermal instability. The shelter wouldn't last. Reyes looked at the fissure, then at the remains of the ship, and smiled thinly. "Okay," he said, voice tight. "Unconventional solution time." He ordered the crew to strip remaining fuel cells and drag them toward the fissure. Kthal protested, calculations flashing. "Detonation risk exceeds acceptable, trust me." Reyes cut in. They placed the cells at measured intervals, wiring them with jury-rigged detonators. As the predators returned, drawn by heat and light, Reyes triggered the first cell. The explosion collapsed part of the fissure, venting pressure sideways instead of up. He triggered the next, and the next, shaping the chaos into something survivable. The planet screamed, the ground settling into a temporary equilibrium. Silence followed, broken only by rain easing into mist. Exhausted, injured, and alive, they regrouped. Kthal updated his models again, hands shaking. The probability curves no longer made sense. He looked at Reyes, who was patching his torn sleeve with tape and wire. You treat extinction scenarios like inconveniences, Cthal said quietly. Reyes snorted. Nah, he replied. Just problems that haven't met the right attitude yet. Dawn never really came on that planet, only a bruised light that crept sideways through the clouds, and it revealed the final mistake in Dr. Cthal's calculations. The predators hadn't retreated, they had regrouped. The sensors, half-blind and held together by human wiring sins, painted a nightmare around the shelter, dozens of heat signatures forming a widening ring, their clicking calls now synchronized, intelligent, patient. Cthal felt his thorax tighten as probabilities finally converged into certainty. This was the extinction curve. Mark Reyes stood at the edge of the safe zone, testing the weight of a broken strut like it was a familiar tool instead of wreckage. They learned, Reyes said, eyes scanning the fog. Means they can be taught the wrong lesson. The ground trembled as something larger than the rest shifted beneath the mud, displacing Earth in a slow, deliberate spiral. The Alpha revealed itself in pieces, a ridge of armored plates, a crown of sensory spines vibrating with information, a mouth that opened sideways, too wide, too sure. The crew froze. Cthal's model screamed total loss. Reyes exhaled once. Doc, he said. How fast does this place heal? Cthal blinked. Geological recovery rate is extreme. Fractures reseal within minutes. Reyes nodded. Good. Then we only need a few seconds. He ordered the crew back into the Fisher shelter, sealing it behind them despite their protests. Alone, he stepped forward, boots sinking into mud that steamed around his legs. The Alpha clicked, a deep command that sent the pack surging inward. Reyes ran toward them. Not away, toward. He slammed the strut into the ground, driving it deep, then another, forming a crude line. The predators lunged. Reyes triggered the last remaining fuel cell at his belt, not in an explosion, but a focused discharge straight into the stakes. Energy screamed through the ground, overloading the planet's rapid heal response. The mud liquefied instantly, collapsing into a sudden sinkhole that swallowed the first wave of predators whole. The Alpha roared, a sound that rattled teeth and cracked crystal trees. It charged. Reyes didn't dodge. He jumped, planting a foot on the creature's armored snout, using its momentum to vault upward and slammed the final charge directly into its sensory crown. Light erupted. The Alpha convulsed, systems overwhelmed, and crashed into the collapsing Earth. The ground tried to heal, sealing predators inside living stone. Reyes hit hard, rolling, pain flaring white-hot through burned nerves. He dragged himself up as the remaining creatures faltered, their leader's signals gone, their learned confidence shattered. Reyes stood between them and the shelter, bloodied, shaking, and grinning like he'd just won an argument. He picked up a rock and threw it, deliberately missing, establishing a new, chaotic rhythm. The predators recoiled, instincts screaming contradiction, and fled into the fog. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. Inside the shelter, Cthal listened to the ground stabilize, readings returning to survivable ranges. He opened the hatch and found Reyes slumped against a stone, breathing hard, eyes unfocused but alive. You should be dead, Cthal said, voice breaking through professional detachment. Reyes chuckled weakly. Yeah, he replied. That was definitely not a normal Tuesday. Rescue signals pierced the clouds moments later, drawn by the energy spike and the impossible survival curve it represented. As medics rushed in, Cthal stared at the sealed ground where an apex predator now lay entombed by its own world. The models finally updated, but the numbers still failed to explain what he'd witnessed. Survival, it turned out, was not just biology or probability. Sometimes it was sheer refusal to lose. The universe had the decency to wait until they were airborne before trying to kill them again, and even then it settled for turbulence and alarms instead of monsters. Mark Reyes lay strapped to a medgurney in the extraction shuttle, skin wrapped in synth bandages that glowed softly as they rebuilt burned nerves and sealed microfractures. He was conscious enough to complain. You know, he muttered, back home this still wouldn't get me out of paperwork. Dr. Cthal sat opposite him, mandibles twitching in what his species now recognized as disbelief layered with something dangerously close to amusement. Outside the viewport, the hostile planet shrank, storms already erasing the scars Reyes had carved into its surface. Geological healing resumed, as predicted, as if the world itself refused to remember losing. Cthal, however, would remember. In the debrief chamber days later, surrounded by counselors and analysts, he played the recordings frame by frame. Each time the human acted against expectation, probability graphs shattered into nonsense. The expedition should have failed 14 times, Cthal said, voice steady despite the implications. It did not. The sole statistically significant anomaly was human Reyes. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. One counselor asked the question everyone was thinking. Was it luck? Cthal paused, then answered carefully. Luck implies randomness. This was pattern. Reyes attended the hearing via holo, propped up in a medbay chair, sipping something that smelled faintly of burned beans. When invited to comment, he shrugged. You fall down enough cliffs, you learn how to land. The council did not know how to respond to that. Policy changes followed rapidly. Survival doctrine was amended. Human advisors were added to high-risk missions, not as commanders, but as something new, anchors. Beings who treated chaos as a familiar coworker rather than an enemy. Reyes was offered commendations, promotions, a teaching post. He declined most of it. I'll take a week off, he said. And maybe a shower that doesn't try to melt me. Cthal visited him before reassignment, carrying a data slate heavy with revised models. I have updated the first night mortality index, he said. Human presence reduces fatality projections by 73%. Reyes blinked. Huh. Lowballing it, huh? Cthal clicked, the Thurin equivalent of a sigh. Your species is disruptive. Yeah, Reyes agreed. We get that a lot. When Reyes finally returned to duty, rumors preceded him. Crews relaxed when they saw a human name on the roster. Warnings lost some of their terror. On another world, another expert would eventually say, this is unsurvivable. And somewhere, a human would answer, okay, but have we tried yet? As for Cthal, he added a footnote to every report thereafter, a sentence he never expected to write. Statistics assume compliance with reality. He had learned, painfully and thoroughly, that humans did not.